Welcome to Go Vote Omaha, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. I'm Geri Simon, a League member and your host. Each program we talk about important public policy issues. We hope you'll discuss those same issues and that at election time you'll be ready and willing to go vote. Our topic this program is an important one. We're going to be talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women. And to do that, we have three guests with us. They're all members of the Native Women's Task Force of Nebraska. Welcome, please, Renee San Souci.
Thank you.
Lin Quenzer and Colette Yellow Robe.
Thanks.
Thank you all for being here. Well, let's start out with the three of you. You're not just all on the task force, you have lives and stories beyond that. So let's start with just briefly, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became an activist in this area. So we'll start with you, Renee.
Okay. My name is Renee San Souci. I'm a member of the Omaha tribe of Nebraska, and I can't remember a day when I haven't been an activist. I would say it started way back when I was a child, watching my parents do some of the same things that I'm doing today. So I guess a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Lincoln, lived there much of my life, and attended a university, graduated from there with a degree in education. And I took on, at first, language issues, native language preservation, and then continued on as I went through everything that we had been addressing over the years. It started to go more and more into environmental, and then further as this came to our attention about missing and murdered Indigenous women, then I started to focus on that, as well as a number of women that I know. So.
Okay, thank you. And Lynn, a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I was born and raised in Mobridge, South Dakota, and that is right across the Missouri River from the Standing Rock and Cheyenne River agencies in South Dakota. And my biological family was from a place called Red Elm, South Dakota, and I was adopted. I don't have any claim to any heritage that I can make, but that is where my heart is, and that is where I was raised up. I had many Native friends growing up, and I never understood why I was the only one in my other circle of friends that had Native friends. And it wasn't until much later that I learned of my own heritage, that indeed they had good cause to befriend me, and I always felt cared for by my Native friends back home. I have been like Renee and like Colette. When you grow up in a very divided society, you find very early that you need to pick a side and you need to stand up for something. And we've all been there, and we've all done that, and we've never strayed from that in our lives. I worked for many years in the domestic violence project in southeast Nebraska, and domestic violence and the issues surrounding violence against women are very real, and I started serving in that capacity at a time when that was something new to advocate for victims of domestic violence. And over the years, it's just gotten stronger for Native rights and for environmental causes, because our Mother Earth is probably just as important to us as our mothers and fathers are.
Okay, thank you. And Colette?
Yes, Colette Yellow Robe. I am currently working at the university down in Lincoln, and I grew up in a place called Winnebago, Nebraska. It's a couple hours north of here. And I'm from the north. I'm enrolled in the Northern Cheyenne tribe in Montana, so I have a pretty nice background. I grew up among a lot of tribal peoples in northeast Nebraska, but also being a part of one of the most, I would say, courageous Northern Plains tribal cultures. So that's very important to me, being Northern Cheyenne. And I would say a lot of my passion or conviction for this sort of work comes from, I think, as more as my experience in my generation, as opposed to necessarily my tribal roots. It was just a fact to be a strong Native or Northern Cheyenne woman but mine's more from generational influences. Women were often taught to compete with each other or for whatever resources, so to speak, that are out there. And my work is more about empowering women. We don't have to compete. We need to empower one another. So that's pretty much my stand in this.
Well, thank you. And when we talk about, we say Native women or this Native Women's Task Force, is that the same as Indigenous? I mean, some people, is there a difference? What do we mean by a Native woman?
Boy, oh boy. Well, I guess being Native, it's a broad statement. A lot of us prefer to use Native or Indigenous interchangeably.
Interchangeably, okay.
And more so than saying Native American or American Indian. Because, like for me, I identify as an Omaha woman, and therefore the Omaha precedes American, because that was original to this area. And so we're in the city of Omaha. This is my homeland. So.
Okay. I think that explains it, because I think some people might not understand the distinction, or it's used interchangeably and what we're meaning. Well, you're all members of the Native Women's Task Force of Nebraska. Okay. So how did the task force come to be? How long has it been in operation?
Let's see, we came together, I would say it's been almost going on 2 years now, I would say a couple of years. Pretty formalized by now, gelled together. Most certainly when the LB 154 bill was dropped, we certainly gelled around that, and then there was a lot of pre-work done before that as well.
Okay.
So
Colette was involved in a lot of that at the university, and they were able to bring in Mary Catherine Nagel, who is the legal counsel for the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center.
Okay.
And the church that I'm pastor at, our women's group came to that, and we all just immediately realized that we had to do this. We had to bring this forward here. And I've known Renee and Colette for a very long time, and so we've traveled together on this road quite a bit already, and so it just kind of naturally came together, and then we talked to the different senators. And
so it was created by the state, then the legislature, the unicameral, created the task force then? No.
No, it's an organic group.
Okay.
We just came together.
So is there a relationship? Do you work with other tribal organizations, with the Nebraska Bureau of Indian Affairs, those kinds of, is there a connection there, or?
No, I wouldn't say formally. I would say that in the way that we formed, it was formed on need.
Okay.
And we're all, therefore, as women, as Native women, we're working together, and we're creating this awareness that will help bring more attention to what's happening to our sisters, mothers, etc.
You're primarily based in Lincoln then, or do you have connections to other cities and rural areas of the state as well?
We have people all over the state of Nebraska and up into South Dakota that are part of our network. Our church in Lincoln is a urban Indian church, so we have members of all the different tribes. We have people from as far away as Oklahoma. We have Choctaw members in our congregation, and the one thing that unites most of our Native peoples in the urban environment is our shared trauma that we have experienced in our lives. And it doesn't matter what tribe you're from, because we have all seen it. Most of us have lived it, and it's a really scary thing. And so we all have those connections throughout the state, and it's a network. So.
Okay. Well, Nebraska is unique in the sense that it's only one of 7 states that does have a task force. And is that a direct result of, there was a roadmap for making Native America safer that was written in 2015, presented to Congress, I believe. And did it come about as a result of that in the other states as well as Nebraska? Would you say that that's the genesis of it, or?
I would think that with each state, that they have their own focus, you know, the tribes that are represented there, and as well as the women who have all addressed this in some way or another. They all have a different way of forming their organizations. And just like with, you know, with how we came together, it was something that we didn't suddenly decide, oh, we're going to do this. It was like, you know, just like what Lynn had explained, it was something that had been ongoing for, I would say, several years in observing what was happening, you know, in Canada, what was happening in all the states, and paying attention, because in that place where we are, you know, as Native women, we are quite aware of the danger to us and to our children, you know, and you know, to the people around us. So we're, you know, this is how we connected.
So do you see your task force getting together or contacting the other ones and sort of having some sort of arrangement or ability to share resources or issues or thoughts at all, or has it not gotten quite that far yet?
I would say that would definitely be appropriate at this time. One thing that we should probably address quickly with that is we have to understand that for the first time in the United States history, we have 2 elected Native American women in our Congress right now. So yes, the shift, the tide is turning right now. It is. The shift is coming. However, although there's only, you know, we're one of 7 states, so to speak, we are all connected. We're all, to borrow the Lakota phrase, we're all related. So there's a lot of connections in there organically, and a little more concrete than people may realize. For example, Kansas, they're going to bring at the university this fall Sarah Deer up here from Kansas, who's very prominent in this area of work. So there's a lot of work being done, and it's connected to many other things. Education, domestic violence, you know, fighting against the way addiction is hurting our families.
Well, let's.
one more point. I would say I'm going to be the bold one here and say I would say with our elections coming up, it would be a great time for us to mobilize together. So.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And there is some attention being paid to Native issues in the presidential race at this point too. So
we just had the first Frank Lemire presidential focus group that happened in Sioux City, where Frank was from. Frank passed away very recently. Frank and his wife Cynthia and their family have been instrumental movers in the state of Nebraska to bring Native issues to the forefront, and have worked very hard with all of us to teach us how to be those activists that can make a difference. And the work that has been done by the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center has been very good, and we have participated in efforts here with Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Day in May, and prior to that back in November. And we've had panel discussions, we've had group meetings, we've been raising money for the Violence Against Women's Sovereignty project that NIWA is doing, and raising money for that, to bring those people out and to help us to network with all of the other organizations that there are.
Okay. We want to remind our viewers and our listeners that we're talking with Renee San Souci, with Lin Quenzer, and Colette Yellow Robe about murdered and missing Indigenous women on our Go Vote Omaha program. Well, we know that Native women go missing at higher rates than the general population. I mean, and that's pretty stunning. And are these women ever found? Do we believe that they're murdered? Are they ever found? Do we ever mostly have instances where we don't know what happened to them? Or is that the big question that kind of leads us to LB 154, which we want to talk about?
I think it leads us to that.
Okay.
The sad facts are that unless someone stumbles across a skeletonized remains or a body somewhere and reports it, most of these people were never found and never heard from again. And we, in 1978, in the small town that I'm from in South Dakota, a woman that I knew, young woman with 2 small children, went missing. And this was right after the Oliphant decision was made in the Supreme Court that took away all of our reservation's ability to adjudicate anybody who had committed a crime on a reservation that was not Native American.
Right. Okay.
And it was a very sad thing because
It had a chilling effect on
nobody
the
ever
cases.
found out who killed that woman. Nobody ever found out anything more about it, other than she died a horrible death and was left. And it got worse from there. And we all know people who have had family members who've died, who've had family members who've been raped, and do come back. Mm-hmm. We have people who've watched their children be shot in front of them. Just all sorts of horrible things.
So let's get to LB 154.
Yeah.
It was passed in the unicameral in March,
Mm-hmm.
introduced by Senator Tom Brewer. So what does it require? What does LB 154 do regarding the issue of missing and murdered women?
Well, they've been empowered to conduct a study to determine how to increase the state criminal justice protective and investigative resources, and to try to quantify how much of this is going on, because we really don't know, and to have meetings with the Commission on Indian Affairs, to convene meetings with the recognized tribal groups in Nebraska, and also to be able to meet with all of our different groups, the Lincoln Indian Center, the Sacred Winds Native American Church, and all the organizations that we have throughout the state, and at UNL and at UNO.
And it requires the state patrol to conduct this study and
Yes.
produce a report. Is that correct?
Yes.
So will there be cross-jurisdictional tribal police forces? Will they be involved and hopefully required or be involved with the study and helping with it in some way?
There was talk about that, and that's going to address some of the complexities of the negotiating between sovereignty and the quote-unquote boundaries that are existing right now in the law. But there was, I recall at a couple of different meetings, yes, hopefully. That
Do you
should
see
happen.
that as important, as including?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay,
Yes.
okay.
Absolutely.
That's the
So
basis.
can your task force help sort of pave the way or help with any kind of tension that there might be in terms of cross jurisdictions and sovereignty issues at all? Do you see that as a role that you can play in when the report is produced? Okay.
I think that as long as the tribes are involved, and then as long as Native women are involved, then the process can, I guess it would bring about this, the way to, bring in the data, to bring about reports about what's actually happening. Because, as we know in this data-driven society we live in, the more evidence that we have to support our case or, the work that we're doing, that's what we're looking toward. And on one hand, it can be very beneficial. On the other hand, the task before us is already, so challenging and overwhelming that, it takes every bit of our energy at times. So, I feel that as long as we are able to come together and do our parts in whatever way that will be, we all have different roles.
Well, now I would want to add too, it's imperative that we're involved, especially in particular the Native Women's Task Force.
Yes.
I'm coming from a place of we must take our seats at the table in order to dismantle the patriarchy or the other systems of oppression, and both sides, tribal and our quote unquote mainstream governments, are not representative of the diversity of women in our society. So it's imperative that we're there.
Okay. That's an important point.
That's a great question.
We're all products of colonialism. And colonialism stands to benefit one solitary group of people, and we all know that that is rich white men. And we have ample evidence to show just where women in general come in that general scheme of things. And what we see here now is a naming of something that has been there since white people set foot on this continent and began subjugating native peoples and raping the women and killing the children. The thing that troubles us most, that we feel that we need to educate people about, is LB 154, though it has these lofty ideals and goals, came with absolutely zero appropriation with it. There is not a
Nothing
nickel
at all. Oh my goodness.
to do all this data research and analysis and things. So we'll be continuing to work with the legislature and with the Appropriations Committee and the Judiciary Committee, where this bill came out of, to try and find some money to help make these things happen and to educate the greater part of the state on what this means for them and how important that is, because we have places like White Clay where has been a blighting influence on the entire state, and we need to have people understand throughout the state what this really means for all of us.
Right. Well, you've and it's going to be produced in a relatively quick period of time. I mean, when is the report to be presented?
June 20.
June of
2020.
June
So,
1st of
so
2020.
basically just a year of amount of time to get this done. And then who will it be shared with? Will it be, hopefully it's going to be very much publicized in terms of what the discovery of the study has been.
It will be submitted electronically to the Executive Board of the Legislative Council.
Okay.
And so that will be a publicly available report that we will all be able to see and participate in and help to dissect. And from that, they're hoping to be able to decide what legislation should come from that.
Okay.
So,
All right. We'll talk a little bit more about, you touched on it briefly, but how historical attitudes and views of Native women, and probably women in general, have, and violence, how are these things intersect? How are they related? What do we know about it?
Well, historically, what happened with Native women was right from the beginning of contact, first contact.
Okay. Explain that for our viewers and listeners.
Okay.
First contact means?
First contact means when Europeans first came to these shores and stepped foot upon our shores, and then therefore began this process of manifest destiny, you know, everything that had been implemented and I guess you'd say inflicted upon us from that point on. And traditionally, Native women held high positions of authority within our tribes. And as such, when the European men were seeking to, I guess, create any kind of agreement, whatever that might be, trade or so forth, they were looking to address the men. And the men have their roles, you know. They have traditional roles which are very strongly upheld, but so did the women. And so when they asked to address who's in charge of the trade, who are your leaders, who are the ones who are going to help us in forming this you know, trade agreement, and they always pointed at the grandmothers and to the women because that was our responsibility. The resources were ours to, you know, we were the ones that organized everything, and our chiefs were the ones that we then gave those orders to, and then they sent them out. That process of leadership is what was, I guess, so offensive to the European men that they couldn't believe that our women held so much power.
And that was lost, that information
Yes.
was lost.
and
Yes.
deliberately
story.
so.
Deliberately.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
You
That's
can go
suppressed.
all the way back to Jamestown colonies, and I mean all the way through. But as the United States, we can point right to President Andrew Jackson
Yes.
as being one of the most offensive people towards Native Americans and towards tribes that had already become, quote unquote, civilized by having adopted, you know, some of the culture's ways of the dominant culture, but not all of it, because the women still had that say.
Yes.
And the women were still the people who were in charge, but they allowed the men to go ahead and do different things. And Jackson and the governors of Alabama and Tennessee and Georgia were very sure to make certain that those women were brought down in very ugly ways.
Now, we just have a couple minutes left, but what I'd like you to just, we'll end up with is talking about why is this issue important to our larger culture? Why should, do we have non-native support for this activism, for finding this information? We think it's really important.
Oh,
but,
yes.
But why is it important to our larger culture?
Well, first of all, I would say, again, remember I come from the position of
Yes.
women. We should empower each other,
Yes.
not as opposed to competing with one another, coming together. And we have younger generations up and coming, however they identify, young men, young women, however, that are looking to us to lead them through. They're starting to understand that this is wrong. A lot of the systems of oppression, gender violence, patriarchy, racism, homophobia, etc., it's wrong. And we must make that mark and that stand for them. Unless we want to, I guess would say, sort of throw away what our own ancestral grandmothers did for us. They took a stand for us. They fought for us. The best saying I've heard is, we're from the strongest of the strong. That's who we are descended from. We owe it to them in order to make the way for the next ones, the new ones coming up.
Okay. Well, thank you all for being here, and we'd love to have you back when the report comes out, and we can discuss more of this. There's much more. We could go on much longer than this. So thank you again all for being here and sharing this information about this important and really pressing issue. So for the League of Women Voters, I'm Geri Simon, reminding you to inform yourself about the issues, and at election time, go vote Omaha.